This is going to be an in-depth view of how I did the dual shock conversion on the Tao Tao 125 F1 model. This is a stock shock here. These are the air shocks that I replaced them with. And I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. All right, when you the main thing is on this mount right here, this is the lower shock mount. The dual shocks mount on the outside. You put them on the outside instead of the single on the inside. And when you do it, you got to take up this space in here. If you don't, when you tighten the bolts up, it'll squash this thing in. All right, and here's the upper mount. And this is how I accomplish that. You take the bushing out of the stock shock. This bushing here. This one. Just take a hammer and knock these out of here. Take this piece and install it in the mount as if it were in the shock. Just slide that bad boy in there. That keeps this mount from mashing together when you mount the shocks on the outside. Okay, and then you're going to have a little bit of a space that you need to fill in when you put the shocks on. And so what I did was, when you buy the new shocks, they come with several different sizes of these. The ID on them is different for different kind of bolts. So what I did was, I took one of them and cut it in half. And I used one side at the top, one side at the bottom. And that takes up the extra space that you need. Okay, and then also, another thing I found out just by trial and error. When you mount the shock, when you put the bolt through the shock, if you don't put a flat washer on the outside of this, it'll want to pull, the bushing will want to pull through. So what you need to do is, let me get right here, you can see what I'm talking about. When you put the bolt through the shock, if you just put a small flat washer in there, it's not enough. You need to put a washer in there that covers like that, so that the bushing can't push back up out of the shock. It'll try to work its way back out of there. I found that out after I did it. So what you got to do is get some larger bushings, I mean not bushings, washers, and mount on there. If the shock were inside of here, it couldn't do that because it can't go past the mount. But on the outside, with just the bolt head, there's nothing to hold it. So you want to put that big flat washer on the outside like that when you put the bolt through. That way it can't work its way back out. All right. And also, the brake reservoir up here, when it's in the stock location, it's around this way a little bit, and it's in the way of the shock. So what I did was, I just unbolted it, and I bent this mount around that way a little bit, and then, you know, put it back up there to give yourself a little bit of clearance for the shock. These shocks that I bought are the RFY. There's tons of them on eBay. They come in a bunch of different colors and a bunch of different lengths. So what you want to do is you want to measure your center to center from your bolts right here on your mounts and up to the top. Measure center to center and find out the length of your stock shocks. Now I couldn't find any that were exactly the same. So what I did was I got one that was about 3/8 to 1/2 of an inch longer. I didn't get the shorter ones, I got them longer, which all that does is adds just a tiny bit of preload, which is not a problem. I think the ones in the front were maybe a 1/2 inch difference, and the ones back here were like 3/8 of an inch difference. So here's basically what you're going to end up with. You're going to have the bolt with the big flat washer on the end. That goes on the outside. And then I used one flat washer to take up, because I needed to space these apart just a smidge more. So I put a flat washer on the, this is on the outside. This is on the outside of the mount before you slide it through the mount. Okay. Then this bushing will be on the inside of the mount. So that's going to come through. And through the shock. Okay, now right here, the stock mount will stop this from moving now on either side, and the inside of this shock will be up against the outside of the mount, so the bushing won't try to push back out. But on the outside, like I said, you need to put you another big washer on the outside of the shock to keep the bushing from wanting to work its way out of there over the head of the nut. And you just put your nylock on there. And that's basically how you pull it off. You do the exact same thing up at the top. I use the other half of the bushing that I cut in half up at the top to take up this space right here. And according to what your bike is, you may need an extra washer to get the spacing right, because you don't want these shocks to be touching each other. You got to get them apart a little bit. And you may need even a little bit longer bolt or a shorter bolt. It's depending on what your setup is. But I used a 4.5 inch bolt. This bolt here is 4.5 inches. And I basically just cut that bushing in half and it fit. It gave me almost exactly what I needed. And I put one washer in to make up the exact distance. You may have to cut, you know, these a little bit different, a little bit longer or whatever. But these shocks came with 3 different sets of these, so there's plenty of stuff to work with. That's pretty much how I did it. And I'll go ahead and mount this up and show you how it looks when I get done with it. Now the reason for putting this bushing in here is because you need some space in between the shocks, because you don't want the shocks hitting each other when they're articulating up and down and what have you. So just figure out how much space you want to put in here. I just held the shocks up there and just kind of eyeballed it and figured out what I needed. And that's what you cut this bushing for. That's the purpose of that. Okay, so here's what it looks like when it's all done. You got your bolt, got the big flat washer on the outside to keep the bushing from moving out of the shock. I put a big flat washer on this side to keep it from moving on this side of the shock. This is the bushing that I cut in half to make up this space. This is the bushing, the nylon and the brass bushing that comes out of the stock shock to fill in this space in between the mount. You don't need a washer here because it's up against the mount on this side, so the bushing can't go nowhere. Put a big washer on this side to keep the bushing from kind of work its way out over the head, and then your nylock. And that's how it looks when it's all done. Do the exact same thing up at the top. That's pretty much what you need to pull it off. If you have any more questions, just hit me up. Be glad to try to help. Peace.